Hello everyone, this is Gilbert Jalad. I'm talking to you here from CPL-SBA headquarters downtown Orlando. You can call us at 877-647-7887. Again, 877-647-7887. This is Tufts on Tax, where all your tax issues and all your tax questions are answered right here with Mr. T. Scott Tufts. He is the master and the expert when it comes to tax law and taxes. And we have a lot to cover up today. So, hello, Scott. How are you?
Hey, good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. And today, of course, we are talking about Fraudulent Form 1099 Miscellaneous and 1099 NEC. So, let's start with what is a fraudulent 1099?
Yeah, so fraud, when you're looking at a issue of whether you have received a 1099 that you believe is not just wrong, but fraudulently issued. So if you have been provided a 1099 that you believe has no basis in law to be provided to you, that it's not just wrong in amount, but it is been done to be vindictive or harassment, or in a situation where you can prove that it's fraudulent, then you have a federal law out there that might protect you. Okay, and that federal law is Section 7434 of the Internal Revenue Code as part of the federal statutes. And that's important because if you want to take action, assuming it's a properly brought claim, then the federal law has a kind of interesting provision in it that, if applicable, can really come to your aid in that situation.
And that brings us to you answered the second question, but the third question was fraudulent as to form itself, independent contractor versus employee.
Right. So one of the questions that comes up is, what do we mean by a fraudulent form? In other words, let's say that you look at the form and it's got an amount on there that you didn't get. So let's just take an example where you didn't get any money from a company at all, and it says $50,000 on it. The question becomes, can you sue them under this statute? And an important first step in the instructions would be that, did you make an effort to contact them and say, hey, you've made a mistake or it's in error, please rescind it, right? Because you can rescind a 1099 and send in a corrected one that says 0 on it. And we've actually litigated that kind of case before, where that can become part of the issue. So one example is fraudulent as to amount, and then another example would be fraudulent as to its character. Now, what might that be? There are some folks who have attempted to bring this claim in federal court, saying that a 1099 has been issued when it should be a W-2. So let's say an independent contractor versus employee. And those cases have been challenged, and a number of courts, depending on your jurisdiction, have said that those should be dismissed because that's not the intent of the statute. Okay?
So vindictive uses of the form. So what do you tell us about that?
All right. So the cases have looked at situations where someone has alleged that, hey, let's say I have a disgruntled worker or something like that, and I am kind of playing loose and fast with tax forms. I might say, you know what, I'm going to send you a 1099 and claim that you got income when you didn't. And I do that. That could be a serious issue. Another problem is that the 1099 can support a deduction for one side of the aisle. So if I want to get a deduction, but I know it shouldn't have been, I might give it to you, and then you get that kind of thing going on. So there's a lot of ramifications here, but the main thing that we're talking about with a vindictive use would be statements made that someone said, hey, I'm going to send you, I'll fix you, I'll get a 1099 and send it to you when I know that, or there's evidence that I knew or should have known that the amount I reported had no basis in fact. Okay? Be kind of a number of examples, but maybe one would be, I know that you did not get $100,000 and you only got $20,000. I put down $100,000.
How often this happens?
Well, more than you would believe.
I'm sure.
Now, I would say though that when awareness of this provision comes out, then I would think this acts as a deterrent, right?
Yeah.
Because what the statute provides, and we can walk through what it provides, it gives you even if the intent is that you have a cause of action you can bring, right? But let's say your actual damages are you hire someone like myself and you pay a small fee to that, and then it's quickly fixed, right? Let's assume that. The statute still gives you the right to pursue the greater of $5,000 or the sum of any actual damages you sustain as a proximate result of that filing. And the whole point there is that if you get dragged into an audit because you have to explain a form that shouldn't have been issued, then under that scenario, you would have the right to bring this federal cause of action. Even if your damages were less than $5,000, you can bring it under the federal statute and claim that you're entitled to at least $5,000. Plus, what's nice about it is you get your costs back of the action if you're successful, and you have the opportunity to get reasonable attorney's fees, which when statutes provide for attorney's fees and you were successful at that, then you can that's a strong claim for those fees, and then that insulates you from being out of pocket. And again, the tough thing here being only that you got to prove fraud.
So we have here using form as a means of harassment.
Right.
How tell us about that?
Yeah, so harassment could also be somewhat like vindictiveness, but the idea being that you're doing it to hurt someone or harass someone in the sense that they're going to have to explain it. And so the courts get into what are they trying to prevent? And again, think about what we're saying here. It's fraudulent. Therefore, it's not even on the radar screen of being reasonable. Mm-hmm. You know, we're not talking about a difference of $1, right? Like, you know, you're off by $1, right? These are the things that can be corrected by a 1099, you know, in amount. And again, my recommendation in these situations is to get it analyzed up front to determine if you have a claim, because you might be in a jurisdiction where, let's say you are asserting it's not fraudulent as to amount, it's fraudulent because you are an employee or believe you're an employee and you believe that they're using the 1099 to do something improper. You might be in a jurisdiction that has already ruled that that is not fraudulent in the terms of this statute. Okay? So you have to get these cases looked at. Taxes in general, I think, as we've tried to alert our audience, taxes are complicated, taxes are difficult, and I think what we're trying to do with this particular topic today is let everyone know that, look, 1099s get flying all over the place. If you get one and you look in the four corners of the document, just like the K1, if there's something wrong with it, get to a professional, get to an expert, make sure that you've looked at it. If it's wrong, what steps are you required to take before you bring a lawsuit? And then what are your remedies or options if there is something wrong? And in the case of the K1 we talked about, that's the 8082 that you got to be looking at. Here, if it's a 1099, if you can't get it corrected, then you're looking at what's your legal recourse.
So do they come first to the CPA or the accountant to make sure everything is right, or they come to someone like you to help them and go over it, go over the documents?
Good question. So if there's some calculation or concept there that and they're working with their accountant, the accountant sometimes will spot this issue. You bring your paperwork to the accountant and the accountant finds it. It's issued out there. There's ways that they have to see it in your transcripts and things like this that you knew nothing about. On the other hand, the concern I have with accountants is while you can get an accountant-client privilege under some states like Florida to protect your communications with your accountant, the ideal scenario that if you're talking about what are my legal remedies, what are my legal course of action, what action might I take in court, if you're on something as serious as fraud, you should be talking to an attorney, not an accountant. And the reason being is those conversations will be protected. And remember, if you're getting into a lawsuit and you're suing another party claiming they committed fraud, they're likely to come back pretty strong against you, correct? And so you want to make sure that you have legal representation at that point, because you don't want to make a mistake of calling and screaming fraud and there be a logical explanation for it. Why? Because then if you accuse someone of fraud and you get it wrong, you might have to pay attorney's fees if you have a claim that you shouldn't have brought. So these are very delicate, sensitive topics that our audience needs to know. They need to probably get to an attorney and discuss.
Wow, I'm sure. Yeah, definitely. And now suing under federal law, how does it work and how can we help?
Yeah, so
that's
where I come
right?
in. Yeah, so this dialogue, you come in, you bring that 1099 in that you believe is questionable. You work through with me whether we feel that you've got a strong case for a fraud claim. We do our diligence. We obviously are going to ask you questions. We're going to make sure that we solidify the engagement. We're going to walk you through the pros and cons of it. And
basically what you answered earlier.
That's right. Now,
example.
One thing that's interesting here is this statute. You're suing the party that you believe sent you the fraudulent 1099, but at the same time, you are providing a copy of that complaint to the IRS. That's one of the requirements under the statute.
Oh.
So you're letting the IRS know you're pursuing this action under this statute. So that's an interesting thing too, because you're obviously trying to correct something that they think you got money, and you're saying, no, I didn't. You see what I'm saying? And so this will boomerang into a situation where somebody's right. Now, granted, you could lose the case, and yet that just be the interpretation of what happened. In other words, it could be an in-between result. But you have to be careful in these types of statutes that when you accuse somebody of fraud, before you do, make sure you get good legal advice.
Absolutely.
And we've got two forms that we know we've talked about before, the 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation or non-employee, for non-employee compensation. Remember, they started that in a few years ago. And then to split it away from the 1099 miscellaneous form. And then there are other 1099 forms that may play into this. And that's another question, because let's say you get a 1099-S or a 1099 B, 1099-C. There's lots of 1099 forms besides NEC and MISC, miscellaneous, so that there's actually a provision that talks about whether that is quote-unquote an information return that falls under this statute. So we've got a whole nother wrinkle there. So like with everything, Gilbert, when you go to bring a lawsuit or whatnot, get good sound advice up front. Do not jump to the conclusion. I think we're in a time where it's easy to label something, identify something, you committed fraud, and then kind of get fixated on that. Make sure you go through the analysis first before you assume that, right?
Now, not to jump to conclusion.
Right. Okay.
What is the conclusion? To summarize all of this and what to advise people and what they should look for and what do they need to do and no.
Right. So I'd say that if you get a 1099 and you're looking at it and say, no way, impossible, did not happen, you have that initial reaction, then I think you're on the path here where you decide whether or not the 1099 should be, whether you should look at this statute and take action in whatever. Now, as I said, there might be preliminary steps to take, but the evidence that I'm going to be walking you through is what's the evidence of harassment, vindictiveness, fraud. In other words, as opposed to an innocent mistake, right? Because if we go contact someone and we already know that it's been issued vindictively, what good is it going to be to contact them, right?
Not a good idea.
Right. So I think, but we might make a formal written demand for them to rescind the 1099 because it's inaccurate. You see what I mean? And so we might have what we call a potential 7434 claim, and if that's the case, then we might be fleshing that out with that initial contact. So the bottom line is get to an attorney like myself, get the case analyzed. But the first thing for our audience is that if you've got a 1099 and you're looking at it and you say, no way, isn't even close, shouldn't have gotten it, you're kind of having that visceral reaction to it, then we need to take a look at it and decide where do you go.
Absolutely. You heard him, folks. Don't hesitate. Call him at 877-647-7887. Again, that number is 877-647-7887. And you can email him anytime at stufts@cplspa.com. That's stufts@cplspa.com. You can visit the website and you can find his bio and all the information you want on Mr. T. Scott Tufts at cplspa.com. And you can, if you're watching YouTube, the information is on the bottom of the screen, but you can always hit the alert button or the subscribe button to get all the episodes so you can keep up to date with the forms and the advices that he gives you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.